So this is a very, very long PowerPoint slideshow. And keep in mind, if we were in class, it would not be done in one day, but I do try to keep it as short as possible for, the fact that we're doing it in this manner of delivery. This is not always the most effective, but at least I'm getting to do some lecture for you. So this is about the interwar era, the era between World War I and World War II, and then we're going to talk about World War II. Second slide is literally just the introduction to what we're going to be talking about first, which is Germany from the Weimar Republic to the rise of Hitler. All right, so Germany, of course, was on the losing side of World War I, and we have the Kaiser. Remember, they had an empire, German empire, that came about due to Bismarck and the 3 wars of German unification. And remember, the King of Prussia was actually made king of the new country of Germany, the allied country, of all the German states. Yeah, remember Austria was kind of kicked out of that. But anyway, we've got also Kaiser William the First, who had passed away, and now we have Kaiser William the Second. Okay, he had come in the 1880s, and he was the guy that forced Bismarck to retire. So, Bismarck, all of the things that he had done, keeping the I guess the continent, maybe the world, from war with all these different alliances that were sometimes secret, and the way that he played it realpolitik, Bismarck had kept the peace in many ways. So William II, he was only 26 or so, 25 or 26, when he ended up becoming the emperor or the Kaiser. And anyway, he makes some bad decisions. Either way, Germany lost World War I. And the Kaiser is going to flee off to Holland. So there's really no government. Now, the government that has to be created, because you're going to see something's going to have to happen to heal Germany, to bring, to bring the economy back, to bring the people back to some kind of order. We've got no emperor anymore. We've got no imperial government. So this is going to be a really tragic failure called the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic is what's going to come in between the wars in Germany. So if you look at this, the Weimar Republic is going to give Germany their first modern democracy. Okay, because remember, you had, at the time of Bismarck, we had all these 39 different German states and all that you hopefully remember, right? So at this point, we're going to see a democracy after the empire. Now we see a democracy. So it sounds like a great idea. I mean, it's a republic based on democratic principles like the United States. So they have, unlike the United States, or they had a directly elected president, whereas we vote for electors, they voted directly for the president. And then, of course, the parliament, we have Congress and, the 2 houses and so on. They had the Reichstag. So how does it go from a republic to a fascist government run by, Hitler and the Nazis? Well, we'll have to explore that as we continue. So I've got this chart I found at some point. It's a flow chart. It's not all that clear in the red boxes. I think all the other ones, the different colors, they seem to be a little bit less fuzzy. But if you look at it, you'll notice that down at the very bottom, you have the public, all men and women over 20, so 21 and older, you're able to vote. And who do you vote for? Well, first of all, look at the big arrow going to the top. The people vote for the president, like I said, okay, direct election. Now that's going to be every 7 years. And then the people are also going to vote for the representation, or the representatives that give them representation in the Reichstag, in the parliament. So it's going to be elected by proportional representation. They're the ones that pass the laws, just like Congress and so on, without getting too deep into all that. It's pretty much, very similar to our Congress, okay? Now, the Reichstag is going to, at that point, they're going to appoint the chancellor, okay? How does that work? Well, the chancellor is going to be sort of like a prime minister, which we do not have. Remember, Bismarck was the chancellor, prime minister, the one who does the daily work of the government. Okay, best example of that today is really Boris Johnson in England. You have the Queen. The Queen doesn't have power in terms of government, right? The Queen is a figurehead today in England, but we do have a prime minister who's running the country day to day. Now, the way this works here in the Weimar Republic is the chancellor has to have a majority in the Reichstag. Okay, it's sort of like our, I'm trying to go not too far out on a limb, but for example, the Speaker of the House in our House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House is chosen from the party that has the majority, for example. Over in our Senate, we have the Senate Majority Leader chosen from the majority party. Okay, so this is just one person, and they're a prime minister of sorts or a chancellor. Okay, now the president is going to appoint specifically who it is. Okay, I mean the Reichstag is going to be involved, but the president has the final say as to who exactly is going to be the chancellor. Okay, even though the Reichstag does have, as I said, there's an arrow going there. The Reichstag does have a word in this. President can veto and put in whoever they want. But again, the majority in the Reichstag is important. Now, the president's key powers are on the right. The president is going to appoint judges, just like our president, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, just like our president. And then you have Article 48. Keep that one in mind. That's a pretty scary one. It allows the president to make laws without Parliament in an emergency. And who decides how to determine an emergency? Well, of course, the president. Okay, so that's the basic setup of the Weimar government at that time. So between the wars, the Germans are going to feel as if they were being treated very unfairly. They lost a lot of territory to other places, France and Denmark, and some of their colonies were taken and just basically handed out to each other in terms of the Allies. Now, one thing that Germany is going to be very upset about is dealing with these extremely high war reparations, okay, basically paying the debts, the war debts. Now, that's not a new thing. That's something that had happened as far back as at least the Romans, the Greeks, or whatever. The loser is going to pay war reparations. Well, we look back in 1871, and I had a professor one time, it was European history, I think it was called 19th Century Europe in graduate school, and I remember the first day of class, he said something that I've never forgotten. He said, well, the 20th century in Germany started in 1871. Okay, now the 20th century, we know, started January of the year 1900, right? January 1st. I mean, wow, that's the 20th century. So when he was talking about that, he said that the 20th century really started in 1871. And what he meant was the Franco-Prussian War, where Germany became a country, like we mentioned, and you should already know, but also the fact that Prussia, the leader of the Germans, Prussia had won the Franco-Prussian War, and they had given France a 5 billion franc indemnity or debt or reparation, and that was way over the top. Now this time, after World War I, France and Germany were still on different sides, but France was on the side of the Allies. So we have an incredibly high bill for Germany to the tune again of $33 billion. All right, now Germany and Russia. Remember, Russia had to leave World War I because they were having the Russian Revolution and dealing with all of that going on within their country. Well, both Germany and then the communists in Russia, the new Soviet Union are not going to be allowed to join the League of Nations. Now, remember, for the United States part, it was Woodrow Wilson's idea, but we never joined it because a lot of the people in the government were afraid that we would give up some of our sovereignty if we joined the League of Nations. So Germany and Russia, though, were not allowed to join. France decides in January 1923 that they're going to come in to an industrial area in Germany called the Ruhr Valley. So the Ruhr Valley, again, it's an industrial area. And what they had done, they had kind of made a deal that the Germans were unable to pay the French the money because it was absolutely ridiculous. It was so expensive. So they were paying what we call in kind, okay? In kind. Not donations, but they were paying things by making products for them. So France comes in because Germany has defaulted on a payment actually of telephone poles. France comes in, and the Germans are going to use passive resistance. Okay, this is called the Ruhr Valley crisis sometimes. And they're basically, the French are going to come in and they're going to take the telephone poles and so on. Now, we're going to look in a second at this hyperinflation that destroyed the economy of the Weimar Republic. And hyperinflation is something that's always concerning. And even, today at a time like when I'm recording this in April of 2020, a time where we have everything shut down in many places and the virus pandemic and all of that, the economy is in really kind of a precarious position. And if things go a certain way, we could end up with hyperinflation. So hyperinflation destroyed the Weimar economy, but also won the sympathy of the rest of the world because we could understand looking in that there was no way they could pay the indemnity. So the Ruhr Valley crisis is a big deal. And here we have on slide number 7 some protest from gymnasts who had come from the Ruhr Valley in the 23 Gymnastics Festival in Munich. And you can read the sign the sign on the left, if you can see it. It says in English, it says the Ruhr remains German. And then the one on the right, if you can read that, it says we will never be vassals, or we never want to be vassals, that sort of thing. Vassals meaning, remember from feudalism, someone who works for an overlord. In other words, hey, we want our freedom. We don't want to be servants under someone else. And you look over on the right and you see that Chicago Daily Tribune has French troops killing 4 resisting Germans. So things got really terrible in the Ruhr Valley. So just keep that in mind. This is all leading to a bigger crisis in Germany. So what happens when you print out too much money and you don't really have anything to back it up? Well, of course, as I said, hyperinflation. That's the danger of not having something to back up your money. So look up at the top, you have 10 Billionen. That's 10 billion Deutsche Marks at that time, okay? And that could barely buy you anything, depending on what year it was. For them to even make a paper money of that denomination is insane. You can look over on the right and you can see how the price of a loaf of bread in Berlin goes from 63 Deutsche Marks, let's say 63 cents, actually, because notice it's 0.63. So let's just use dollars. That's what I usually do. It makes it a little bit more understandable to us who use dollars, okay? Because you can hear the exponential change in the amount of money they have to pay within 5 years for just a basic thing, a loaf of bread in Berlin. Okay, 1918, say 63 cents. 1922, it's $163.15. January 23, $250 for that same loaf of bread. July 23, $3,465 for a loaf of bread. September 1923, $1,512,000 for a loaf of bread. Okay, and then look at the bottom. It's crazy. Okay, And you see on the picture on the left, the boy and the men standing there, it's going to be a lot cheaper for you to burn the money for heat than it is for you to try to spend that money. Hyperinflation made the money worthless. On slide number 9, we see kids over on the left playing with blocks of money because it was cheaper than buying them toys. And then on the right again, someone else burning the money for heat. It's cheaper. Slide number 10, more pictures. I happen to really love pictures, and that's partially why this PowerPoint is so incredibly long, because I do love pictures and I think it helps you to see them. But up at the top, you've got a guy basically wallpapering with money. That it was cheaper to use it for wallpaper. You've got a guy there with a sort of, is that a wheel? It's sort of a wheelbarrow. It's a cart. You got money. You're trying to go buy a loaf of bread or something. Now, if a loaf of bread costs that much, imagine how much anything else would cost. Your clothes, a pair of shoes, anything, okay? Meat, imagine, okay? We're measuring just one thing here with the bread from what I'm telling you. And then over there on the right, you've got people, look at what they're doing. Look at what they're doing. Pay attention to that because that's really interesting. They're trying to sell the money, the paper money. When we talk about the rise of Hitler, we've got to talk about the Munich beer hall. I never say this right in German. I can read German, but I swear I cannot speak it very well at all. But the Munich beer hall, I just call it a coup because that's what it was. An attempt to take over the government, the putsch. Okay, so Adolf Hitler felt like the Treaty of Versailles was just terrible to the Germans. Remember that incredibly difficult, if not impossible, $33 billion to pay and all the other things. He felt like they had been treated unfairly, as did many Germans. So 1923, by this point, he's a part of the National Socialist German Workers' Party that we call the Nazis. Now, don't let anyone tell you that the Nazis were actually socialists, okay? Because what we talk about when we say socialism, we usually are talking about Marxism, which is led by the workers. Now notice they also use the word workers there. That doesn't mean that this is a socialist party that's for the workers, led by the workers, as the word socialist usually implies when we're talking in general. Our minds usually go to Marxism, right? So it just shows you that anyone can put anything out there and say, oh, this is what we are. Well, that's not what they are. Okay, this is going to become a fascist government where you're going to have the leader in Adolf Hitler, and you're going to have his guys that do whatever he says, and we're going to talk about that quite a lot pretty soon. But Hitler, I mean, how did he even get in with this bunch? Well, there's stories. I mean, I've read, gosh, I do not know over the years. I took two different classes in graduate school. One was Adolf Hitler and one was about Nazi Germany. So they overlapped, of course. But I've read probably one time, I was trying to count, probably 70 books, maybe 75, about just Hitler. People trying to figure out what's up with this guy. And the truth is, there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we just don't know. And for example, I mean, do you ever meet a kid? You know, you're getting acquainted with your friends in college, and there's a guy sitting beside you. And you start talking, and he turns out that we call the roll, and his name is Joey Hitler. I mean, Hitler. They're going to change their name. It's hard sometimes to trace what happened to his family because and there's all sorts of things. Like I said, I've read at least, to my knowledge, 70 or 75-ish books about Hitler in and out of those school, graduate school classes. And there's so much that we just speculate about because we just don't know. Now, what we think happened, they got him involved with the Nazis. I mean, he was he was a really just a guy who wanted to do anything he could in the military in World War One. Okay, so what happened was supposedly he was sent to actually investigate this group, and he ended up becoming part of them, and then he ended up becoming the leader of the Nazis. And there's variations on that story. But by 1923, he is in this position. He's very powerful in the Nazi party, and they attempt to seize the Bavarian government. Okay, now the government, they're having a meeting in the beer hall in Munich, and so Hitler comes in, with his guys, and he fires a shot into the ceiling, jumps up on a chair, and he yells out, "The National Revolution is broken out. The hall is filled with 600 men. Nobody's allowed to leave." Then, he went ahead and apparently what they say that he said after that, he said the Bavarian government was now deposed. Okay, that means that the Nazis are putting the Bavarian government out, of power. We're taking over. So he declared the new government with Ludendorff. Okay, Ludendorff was a World War I hero who's part of the Nazis and so on. So 2 days after this Munich beer hall coup, Hitler's going to be arrested and he's going to be charged with high treason. Now think about this. Okay, high treason in our country, generally speaking, you could get the death penalty. Well, Hitler gets 5 years sentenced to jail, and it's not going to be a jail where he's doing a lot of hard work and very uncomfortable, as you'll see in a minute. It's Landsberg prison, which is not going to be a difficult. His time in prison is not going to be all that difficult, as you'll see in a picture in a few minutes. Anyway, to top it all off, he only spends 9 to 10 months in jail anyway for trying to commit, for committing high treason, trying to take over a government and throw out the leader. That's a sign right there of a weak government. So the fact that they don't give him a much higher priority in terms of imprisonment, again, shows how weak the government was. Now, Erich Ludendorff, the guy that, is also prominent here in this beer hall coup in 1923, he's going to be a guy who was extraordinarily nationalistic. Okay, he's all about the fatherland. He's all about Germany, the Volk, V-O-L-K, the Volk, pure blood Germans. Now, he's also going to be a guy who said that, the army didn't lose World War I. Germany did not lose World War I. Instead, we were actually betrayed by the civilians on the home front. Now, come on, this is one of those conspiracy theories, and this is something that the Germans, when the Nazis get in power, they are going to actually spread this. It's very, very widely believed in Germany by a lot of the right wing, of which the Nazis are a part. So Nazis, when the Nazis come into power, they're going to blame the Jews, but not just the Jews, the Marxist. Okay, so remember, the National Socialist movement is not a Marxist movement. And they're also going to really blame communists, okay, the Bolsheviks at the time. There's so many things going on. Now, when you look at what happens in reality, Ludendorff's idea that gets spread around as propaganda, blaming everything on these people, is ridiculous, okay? Germany was running out of everything. Germany was barely able to do just basic, to keep themselves standing and not give up at that time, because by 1918, by spring of 1918, the United States has sent a lot of troops. We had joined in 1917 on the side of the Allies, but by 1918, we had sent in a ton of troops. So this is not going to be a factual thing that Ludendorff is going to propose. Okay, Ludendorff, who had been, again, he's going to be a general in World War I. Ludendorff is going to have to try to figure out a way in his mind to convince the Germans that it was not their fault, that they had been stabbed in the back. Okay, so that's going to be also a really popular propaganda tool during this period. Slide 12, there's just some pictures from the attempted takeover of the government of Bavaria. And then here's a picture of the guys that are on trial. So right there, you see their names written, underneath them. Some of them are more important than others. But you see in the center with the big Prussian, one of the big Prussian helmets on, you see Ludendorff and General Ludendorff. And then you have to his left, you have Hitler there with his famous mustache, but he's in civilian clothes. Okay. So this is as they're going in for the trial. So let's look at the bigger picture too of what was going on. Remember the French and their occupation of the Ruhr Valley. And you're going to have really a state of undeclared war between the French and the Germans for a while. And remember also that the Germans were trying passive resistance, but that's not going to last forever. So eventually you're going to see the Germans using guerrilla warfare, and then the French are going to basically enforce this blockade, and the currency is going to be depreciated. Like I said, hyperinflation. So what we also saw happening here by 1923 is that bartering was what most people were doing. Again, you didn't have the money to buy things because the money was worthless, but you could barter. I have some of this and you want some of that, and you have this, let's trade, right? Barter. So you had food riots during that time, and it was just absolutely awful for people, especially the middle class, because they had everything they had saved just gone. You notice, if you have hyperinflation and you think you have, I don't know, $50,000 in the bank, and then suddenly you have like $20 in the bank, if that. Okay, because remember how high this hyperinflation was. So it's going to hit the working classes very hard too, of course. And you're going to have also everyone having a lot of debts that they have to pay off. Because remember, in the 1920s, we saw the farmers in the United States and everywhere suffering because they couldn't pay their bills as the economy was already breaking down. Worldwide, really, it was going to start breaking down due to a lot of things that happened in the 20s. So you had a lot of other parties in Germany that tried to exploit all of this. But again, the big one is going to be the beer hall coup with Hitler and Ludendorff. So keep that in mind. And Hitler absolutely hated the Bavarian authorities. He absolutely he thought they were completely useless. And he wants to have a strong Germany. Remember, Hitler and Ludendorff both are extraordinarily nationalistic. So anyway, Hitler is actually taking a page from the playbook of another guy we're going to talk about named Benito Mussolini over in Italy, who had done something very similar in 1922. But Hitler and the whole beer hall thing is going to be a failure. We're going to have several Nazis killed. I think there were about 3,000 of the Nazis that were participating in that event, but several of them died. You're going to have some policemen who are going to die. I think Hitler even got hurt as he left the scene. And anyway, it's just going to be a terrible mess. So as I said before, Hitler's going to hide for a while, and then he's going to be arrested. But when we get to the trials are just not even we would look at these today and we would clearly say, what's going on in Bavaria? Well, again, part of it is the government is not that strong. Okay. Ludendorff was a war hero, and General Ludendorff was actually set free. He was acquitted of this thing, okay, of this treason. Hitler got the 5 years imprisonment, but again, as I said, he's not going to serve that long. Now you can find pictures of Hitler in Landsberg prison. Those are pretty easy to find on Google, but this is the one that I put on there. That's him, sitting there. It looks like they're having tea. Nobody looks like they're suffering very much from being in prison at that point, at that place. So we'll talk about the text that's on that PowerPoint in just a minute, a little bit, but you can read most of that for yourself. But first of all, I want to tell you about Mein Kampf, the book. Now, it started out, he wanted to call it something very different, but it kind of sounded like a complaint. So they decided, you better make it sound really strong. So they decided to call it My Struggle. Now, this is actually a political manifesto talking about his beliefs and what he actually wanted to do. And it was published in 1925, and then again in 1927 you had the second volume. It's pretty massive. I have a reprint of a 1939 illustrated version of Mein Kampf. Thought I had one in German, but I don't know where it disappeared to. Maybe I dreamed that, I don't know. But anyway, Mein Kampf means my struggle or my battle. Now, the first volume of it is called The Settlement of Accounts. Sometimes you can actually translate that into revenge. That was written in 1924. Okay, so this is where he was in prison, and so he's actually, a lot of times I believe he was dictating this to one of his guys in there with him in prison. So it talks about him when he was younger a little bit, his ideas and the betrayal of Germany and the collapse of the German Empire at the end of World War I. And you also hear him talking about race. Okay, so he believes that this group that he calls the Aryans are going to be the ultimate, the Übermensch, the overman, or the Superman. All right, the race that's meant to rule the world. And then he refers to Jews as parasites. Now, again, Ludendorff was another guy that spouted all sorts of racist stuff about the Jews in particular, blaming the Jews, saying that they, in addition to others that we mentioned earlier, that Ludendorff said the Jews were part of the problem, that Germany did not lose the war, but that they were betrayed from within and all that. So anyway, in Mein Kampf, Hitler's going to declare that the need, the Germans have at the moment is to spread out, right? To seek Lebensraum. I can't pronounce German words. I can read them, y'all. I'm sorry. But living space, okay? And what he wanted to do, he said, was to expand into the East. Now, why the East? Well, the Slavs, he believes the Slavs are inferior. Basically, what he's saying basically in Mein Kampf in terms of race is the Aryan is the top, right? And so people sometimes say, well, wait a minute, the Aryan, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, perfect person, he's not even an Aryan. Well, yeah, he is, because Aryan is basically somebody who's Caucasian. Now, at the top, see, there's gradations of what Hitler will say about that. He'll say the perfect ideal is the blonde hair, blue-eyed, strong Nordic type, but that if you're white and you have no African blood, you have no Jewish blood, you have no Asian blood, then you are still Aryan. So he didn't have to have blonde hair and blue eyes. to identify as Aryan. It's just that he wasn't at the, the physical specimen wasn't the most perfect, in other words. So all of those groups, including the Slavs, the people in the eastern area, the area we talk about, when I was growing up with Czechoslovakia, we have the Slav Republic, and we have all these other different regions over there that are adjacent to Russia. He also couldn't stand, remember, the Marxists, the Russians, the communists. So he's calling for revenge against France. He is just rambling. And I've heard a lot of people say, and this is very true, that if you read it in English, you're like, wow, this is really rambling. Doesn't make a lot of sense. But then if you read it in German, you say, wow, this is really rambling, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. See, he's doing this almost a stream of consciousness thing sometimes in Mein Kampf. And he's basically talking about people as if we were animals. And he especially said that the Jews needed to be eliminated, really, he said, in what would have to be a bloody process. So he singles out the Jews. Now, the second volume of Mein Kampf was basically called the National Socialist Movement. And this part was written after he got out of prison in late 1924. And he's telling people what he wants to do politically, including, again, wiping out the Jews. When someone tells you something like that, you need to believe them. Okay, he's kind of laying it all out there, laying out his plan. So he's saying that the Nazis have to get more power, and then the Nazis have to become stronger, use that power to make Germany the leader of the world. Okay, so anyway, you're going to see that when you look at Mein Kampf, I mean, it is really difficult to read, and Hitler, for all of the fame that he has, he came to the national and even world, platform at some point when he was related to that beer hall thing in Bavaria trying to take over the government. People sort of, oh, who is that guy, right? And he's in prison. He comes out, he's written this book, and it's so nationalistic that a lot of people in Germany embrace what he's saying, okay? The whole anti-Marxist and anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish and anti-everybody that's not Aryan, a lot of that is playing to the people during the Weimar Republic who are the working class, remember, the middle class. They're suffering, like we mentioned before. And Hitler is coming out there and saying, look, we've got a plan. We can figure this out. It appeals because it is using something called nationalism. Nationalism, okay? So remember, nationalism means, and you may remember this from World War I, it means you're putting your country first, but in a whole different way than patriotism. It's like rabid patriotism. My country, right or wrong. That's nationalism. Okay, and so this appeals to some of the Germans. Now, he's dividing people into categories, like I said. And if there's the Übermenschen, okay, the overman, the upper, the superman, if there's the Übermensch, then there's going to be the Untermensch, or the Untermenschen also. That's the inferior. So we have the superior as well as the inferior types of people spelled out in Mein Kampf. Okay, here we are already on slide number 16. We have Weimar president Paul von Hindenburg, who was actually also a World War I German hero. And Hitler's going to rise to power because he's going to become the chancellor. Now, he's going to get into this powerful position in March of 1933. So what had happened there is actually pretty complicated. Let's see if we can make it a little bit more, simple. So by the time the Nazis have become a political party by this time, and by the time we get to 1930, the election, they've become the second largest party in Germany. And what's also going on is we have the Nazis out there spreading so many propaganda pamphlets all over the place. They have money backing them. They have some wealthy supporters. And you're going to see that part of what's happening here is the Great Depression has started. And that's not just a thing that's isolated to the United States. This is a worldwide Great Depression. So when the crash in 1929 happened, you saw the two, like the left and the right, the Nazis on the right and the communists on the left, they had gained a lot of power in the 1930 election in Germany. The Nazis are on the rise at this point. So the Weimar parties, the Weimar Republic had so many different political parties. And I always think of this type of thing when people talk about, well, I'm not going to vote for the Republican or the Democrat. I'm going to vote for the blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, not going to happen. Not going to win. Okay. And look at the Weimar Republic. They had about 40 different parties. 40. Now, I don't know how anybody achieved any sort of a majority. Well, anyway, a lot of times it was actually a plurality that they had to deal with. But anyway, from 1931 to 1933, the Nazis, under Hitler's leadership, they've been actually going out there and campaigning. Okay, he's going to be going across Germany talking to the people, and then we have his paramilitary guys. These are the guys that are out there actually strong arming. So as far as his paramilitary guys go, these are the brown shirts, okay, the SA. And they're going to be out there in the streets. They're going to be beating up people. They're going to be out there, breaking arms and legs and just roughhousing around in Germany. Okay, so they're campaigning and they're also using violence. So there wasn't really anything that could block the Nazis because the Nazis were very well organized at this time. So 1932 election, the Nazis became the majority party in the Reichstag. Okay, now wait, that's not entirely true. Actually, they're not the majority yet. They're actually going to be the biggest of all those parties that were represented in the Reichstag, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't think they had a majority at that point. So yeah, that has to be the way it is, because the way I remember it is Hitler is going to say, all right, look, we've got the Nazis, we've got the largest group of, representatives here in Parliament, so we should be allowed to have chancellor. It should be, whoever. It should be me, Hitler, I'm sure, was saying or thinking. But anyway, it doesn't work. And you're going to see that eventually Hitler is going to actually take control. Okay, he's playing real politic himself, working behind the scenes. And we're going to have some violence on the streets. As I said, we have his paratroop guys, the SA guys. They're out there fighting with communists, killing communists on the streets. And you're going to have Hitler being questioned, as to whether he was actually a citizen of Germany. Now, again, Hitler was born in Austria, and he always said that he felt as if he were just a German, not an Austrian, because he had renounced his citizenship from Austria way back sometime in the 20s. So he couldn't run himself for public office until 1932 or 33, something like that. So it took a while before he actually became an actual German citizen. Now, again, you have to go back and see how Germany unified in the 1860s and 70s, and you have to understand how Austria was now, pushed out of German affairs and all that kind of stuff to see what's really going on. So anyway, Hitler had run for president. He had actually run for president, and he had gotten, over 10 million votes. Okay, he'd gotten over 10 million votes because it wasn't just two parties running as we expect. You had some other percentages in there. Hitler got something like 36, 37, 38%. Hindenburg got close to around 50%, maybe 52%. And you have some other candidates. So 3 days after the election, where we have the winner being Paul von Hindenburg, the German government is going to ban the SA. Okay, remember the brown shirts, the rough guys that are out there in the streets. They're going to ban them. But what happened then? And again, I try to make it simple, but it's really not that simple. There's so much going on. But what happened then was in the 1932 presidential election, again, you've got Hitler gaining some power, the Nazis gaining some power and so on. But you also had a chancellor who was appointed then, and he's eventually going to quit. Okay, he's gonna actually step down as chancellor. And at this point, the Nazis don't have the majority in the Reichstag, but they do have the largest number of members of the party elected in the Reichstag. So you're going to see that Hitler and his Nazis are going to continue rising in power by all sorts of violent means. Okay, you're going to have a lot of violence where the SS and the SA, the paramilitary groups, the SS is the other one, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. But you're going to have a lot of things going on with the Nazis strong-arming people. So in January of 1933, you're going to have the Nazis getting three big things, okay? Hitler's going to be named chancellor. He's going to make a deal, because there was no majority government, so he was bucking for something. He got chancellor finally. You're going to have a Nazi named to be, I think, minister of I think it's the interior. And then you're going to have one of his right-hand men, one of Hitler's right-hand men, Hermann Goering. He's going to be named as like the minister of the interior for Prussia, I think was what it was called. So anyway, Nazis are going to have parades throughout Berlin, and it's going to be generally called the seizure of power. Now, what we see here is Hitler did not come in to power by a coup. He tried a coup, okay? He didn't serve as chancellor because he strong-armed his way and killed the chancellor and took over. I mean, he was basically able to go in through legal means. Now, that's important that you remember. Hitler did not get into Germany through, through illegal means. They're working through the constitutional Weimar Republic. That's important because you've seen other people do that. Napoleon, when he got in the French Revolution, he got in through the Constitution, and then he starts to dismantle it. Okay, Hitler comes in as a chancellor, and they start to dismantle the Constitution. Now, also, you're going to see that another thing. There's going to be March of 1933. There's going to be those elections, but one thing that I didn't mention was the Reichstag fire. Okay. So this is going to be arson, purely and simply on the building of the parliament. And this is going to happen a few weeks before Hitler actually became chancellor. Now, this was said in many ways to be a sign, right, that you're not going to mess with the Nazis. So you had the paramilitary guys out there really flexing their muscles as they did. But remember, this is where we end up with something called the Enabling Act, okay, in 1933, which it gave the chancellor, guess who that was? Gave the chancellor the power to enact laws without the Reichstag and to override the Constitution. Oh my. Okay. So Hitler is now chancellor. How's he going to get into a position where he is much more than that? Well, once Hindenburg dies, we're going to see that he's going to take over. Now, when Hindenburg died in 1934, Hitler had an election. Hey, do you want me to be president? That he had a big referendum. He says, you want me to be president? And they're like, sure. Okay, apparently, according to the Nazis, he got like 90% of the vote. Now he does have a referendum though, because a little bit later in August, you're going to see that he's going to merge the post. Okay, he's going to merge chancellor and president. He's just going to become der Fuhrer. And all of this, I mean, you're going to see that even though Hitler had been ruling under the Enabling Act, Hindenburg had been president until his death, and Hitler was doing just what Napoleon did. He was legally trying to consolidate his powers. Now, by the time we hit 1933, all the parties except for the Nazis were made illegal, and the Reichstag was just a puppet. So Hindenburg had some titles, let's put it that way. He was still commander-in-chief of the military, whatever, and he could negotiate foreign treaties, but that was about it. Okay, it didn't stop the president from doing some things. But as I said, when Hindenburg dies, Hitler is going to actually merge those two offices and become der Fuhrer, supposedly with the blessing of most of the German people. Not much to say. The title says it all. So we go forward a little bit here, a couple of years, because this is not a class on just Hitler and Nazi Germany. Although, as I said, I have taken that class. Very interesting. But what we need to hit are the high points. And remember, as I said, this is going to be a very, very, very long 106, I think, slides. So don't try to sit down and watch all this and listen to it and take notes in one sitting. That's not how it's meant to be. Okay. So anyway, 1935, we have the Nuremberg laws, which took the rights away from German Jews. Okay. They're not going to be citizens anymore unless you were an Aryan. Remember, there's a definition again in Nazism and then neo-Nazism today, non-Jewish, non-Slavic, Caucasian. Also remember, you don't have any African blood, you don't have any Asian blood, etc. Okay, especially of the Nordic type, supposed to be the master race. So they take away the rights of the German Jews. Now, marriage then is going to be forbidden, verboten, is going to be forbidden between the Aryan and the Jew, and things are getting worse. So once we've determined that, hey, these people are inferior, that's the danger. That's the danger, because then you're going to start treating them as if they are inferior instead of humans, just like everyone else. And so during this time, there's going to be a new industry that comes up where they're able to actually try to measure and document racial differences. Physiognomy is going to record things like hair color, eye color, and all that. They're going to measure how far your eye is from your ear, how far your lips are from your chin, how big your nose is. Is it wide? Is it all sorts of things? And I have as my own editorial at the bottom of that slide. I have imagined what they could have done with genetic testing. Oh my gosh, that would have been a nightmare, wouldn't it? So here we have the next really big important thing that happens. This is going to be the Kristallnacht, and it's going to be a time where we see what's really going on in Germany at this time in terms of violence, in terms of hatred for the Jews. So Kristallnacht can be translated as the Crystal Night or the Night of Broken Glass. And this is going to be a bunch of these anti-Jewish pogroms. Okay, I remember a pogrom. I also defined it for you below there. It's a Russian word. It just means to wreak havoc and to demolish violently. Historically, it's going to be referring to violent attacks by local non-Jewish populations on the Jews in Russia and in other countries. Okay, that's a specific use generally for that word. So, November 9th and 10th, 1938, things are terrible. Germany has already annexed Austria, and we're going to see in areas of Czechoslovakia that have been occupied by German troops, we're going to see these pogroms, these just horrible actions against the Jews. Now, what happens is the Kristallnacht owes its name to the shards of shattered glass that line the streets. And again, the night of broken glass from the windows of their homes and their places of worship and their businesses. And this is going to be one of the most horrific things that happens in modern times to people who didn't know what was going to come in Germany. So what had been happening is for a while, the Germans had been sending a lot of Jews who had Polish citizenship, who were in Germany, sending them out, putting them on, trains and sending them back or sending them to Poland. And what we see is that you found that Poland didn't want them, the Germans didn't want them. So a lot of Jews were in the middle here. They were in what, kind of a no man's land. They couldn't go back to Germany and they couldn't go into Poland. So you have this young boy named Herschel Grinspan, I think is how I might pronounce that. But he was only 17 years old, too young to have to deal with all this. But he got news somehow from his family that his parents, and I think he had a younger sister, that they had been deported and they're over there, they've lost everything. They're sitting there without a country. And pretty much, please help us. And I mean, he's a kid, he doesn't know what to do. So apparently what he did was he went to the German embassy in Paris, and he happened to bring a gun with him, and he does kill Ernst von Rath. Again, ignore my accents in any language, please, even in English, because this is not the accent that I grew up with. But anyway, after Kristallnacht, the Germans don't tell the story of how they've been, deporting Jews who actually were Polish citizens. They don't tell that story about this young boy being frustrated because his family is stuck between two countries. They just say, oh man, what happened was this fine, upstanding German official in Paris got assassinated, and it was a Jew. And so they say to the people that what we call the Kristallnacht was just this spontaneous series of anger and rebellion and outbursts and revolts against the Jews because of the action of the assassination of that one guy. Not exactly. So there on slide 22, that's pretty much the story that I just told you. Okay, they're in between the countries, and he's gone over there, and there's a picture of him there. He's, again, super young, 17 years old. But, anyway, he did commit an assassination, but then they extrapolated that out to all Jews. And, well, as I said, there's a lot more to this story of how it actually happened. So, when you have a country that has a propaganda minister, things can't be good. See, back when President von Hindenburg had died, the soldiers, the military, took an oath to Hitler, okay, oath of allegiance to Hitler instead of to Germany. So that's one thing. You're also going to have the civil service workers taking that oath to Hitler, and they swore unconditional obedience to Hitler. They said not to Germany. So that's where it starts to go from just nationalism, my country, right or wrong, et cetera, to the cult of personality and Hitler and what's propping all that up? Well, we've got to have propaganda. We've got to have someone out there spreading misinformation. And we talk about that a lot today because, well, today with the internet, although I clearly remember most of my life not having the internet, okay? But it does make a lot of things more convenient, and things like this, like what we're doing now, Blackboard and online stuff. And, several years ago, this would have been impossible. I don't know how we would have done it without, I don't even know how we would have finished this semester. It would have been crazy. But it happens, though, that everybody online can think they are or pretend to be an expert. Now, the problem is that a lot of them think they are experts and they are really not. And so, again, misinformation. I've seen so much misinformation along just during the pandemic. I can't even tell you how much anti-science I've seen out there. And I do have a good, strong science background, even though don't ever evoke math in front of me. But I love science. And I've heard some stuff out there that just makes my head hurt. So people are very easily convinced, okay? And you have to use critical thinking to figure out the truth. And it's really hard sometimes because people can sound as if they really understand what they're talking about, particularly in the sciences. You use a few science sounding words and you kind of talk a little bit in circles, and you can convince a lot of people that don't know anything or know very little about science that what you say is true. So they had the literal minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. And that's his job, is to spread misinformation. Okay? So he's going to suggest that, hey, there's something much bigger. We've been talking about this for a while. See, the Nazis have said this for a while. You remember Ludendorff, they've said this for a while, that there's this whole group of Jews that are conspiring to take over the world and blah, 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 right? So he basically says, well, the world Jewry has conspired to commit the assassination of a good German man. Now, this is what goes out to the people before the crystal knocked. Okay, this is what Goebbels is going to announce to the people of Germany as he announces the shooting of Ernst von Röhm. This is what he says. He says the Fuhrer has decided that demonstrations should not be prepared or organized by the party, but insofar as they erupt spontaneously, they are not to be hampered. Holy cow, do you see what I just read to you? Read that, okay? Something has happened. We want to blame the Jews. It happened to be a young Jewish boy. Let's make things much worse. We're not going to take responsibility as the Nazis. We're not going to organize these riots or demonstrations or protests or, killings or anything else. But here's the part. Insofar as they erupt spontaneously, they are not to be hampered. Oh, well, that means that we're basically giving you carte blanche. If you want to go out and attack the Jews using this as an excuse, you have at it. This is horrible. This is absolutely horrible. Okay, the rioters are going to come out in full force that night, and they're going to destroy synagogues in Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland. And that's really only the beginning. Okay, so during this horrific event, we're going to see a lot of synagogues that were burned, and there were a lot of people who had been told that, just like Goebbels had said, don't interfere. If these things come up organically, if they're just spontaneous, which they weren't, don't even interfere with them. Let them, kind of get their anger out. So the only time they generally intervened was if flames were going to spread to other buildings that were not occupied by Jewish people. Now, the SA and the Hitler Youth members, Hitler Youth, that had been something that was started quite a while back. I mean, it actually goes back to probably 1922 or 1923, because this is going to be where the Nazis are trying to get the young men, especially the young boys, in. And anyway, you're going to see it's going to be, generally speaking, you're going to have the Hitler Youth is going to be boys from 14 to 18, and then they're going to have the younger boys from about 10 to 14 that are going to be joining the basically this is a way to train them in Nazi sentiment, right? It's a way to train them up in the doctrine of the Nazis. And they're gonna get a lot of the Nazi ideology, especially the fact that the Aryans were the master race and all of the other racist stuff that's going on. You're also going to see with the Hitler Youth, they were going to go in and try to spy on Bible studies and try to keep people from going to church. And there's all sorts of as I said, indoctrination, really, it's filling their heads, brainwashing them in Nazi propaganda, really. But you're going to have them being trained to really change everything to the point where everyone's dependent upon Hitler and the state. Okay, so again, racism, getting rid of religion, all that. Now, what they did also was they trained these guys to be physically very fit, and they're going to be doing a lot of training in terms of something that would be more akin, from what I've read about it, more akin to basic training in the military. So they're also taught that, you should be willing to die for the Fuhrer. You should be willing to die for Germany. So yeah, that's one other thing that was coming up around this time. So just to see who they were, remember. So you've got the Hitler Youth and the SA. Remember, those guys are the brown shirts. They're the paramilitary, the guys who love to have their guns and go out there and do, what they say is patriotic for their country. And anyway, the very last one down there, the last bullet point I have, the SA, and it's a German word that I can read, but I surely can't pronounce. But it literally means assault detachments, but they're usually called the stormtroopers. Okay, so we've got the stormtrooper brown shirt jerks and the Hitler Youth members going across the country, shattering the owners' windows of any kind of businesses, taking whatever goods there were. They're going to, mess around with things you shouldn't mess around with, including cemeteries and, again, places of worship. So you see over on the right, the Jews were fined for the Nazi riots. True. Okay. There was a thing that really upset me when I remember first learning about the Kristallnacht was that their insurance, the Jews' insurance, was not honored. The government of Germany at that time said, no, it's your own fault that this happened to you. I'm paraphrasing, but, pretty much you shouldn't be Jews. So you deserved it, clean up this mess. And that's the way things were right here. This is 1938. Okay. Down at the bottom, on the bottom right, you can see Judah with the Star of David written on that window. And that's going to designate that that's a Jewish business. On slide 24, we've got some cold, hard facts and figures. So 91 Jews were killed during the night. Look at the next number though. 30,000 Jews were arrested and put into concentration camps. Okay, now this is 1938. So the concentration camps have not become specifically death camps yet. It's a place to hold them. And concentration camp, I mean, literally defining it, it's a place that you're going to have just a bunch of people in quarters that are not going to be comfortable. It's just concentrated means you have so many things in there together. In this case, it's not things, it's people. I mean, we think always, most of us do, we think immediately of the Germans and the Holocaust and, Nazis and all that stuff. But I mean, a concentration camp is a place where you have people, again, concentrated in small areas generally where there's not enough hygiene, there's not enough food, water, all that kind of thing. And they're going to be in prison. They're not going to be able to come and go. Sometimes they're waiting there just to be killed. Sometimes they're being put to work. We saw this also. We had concentration camps that were in Cuba during the Spanish-American War in 1898. We're going to see other times where that particular definition is not referencing just the Nazis, okay? So just make sure that this is usually how we think of it. And there were several hundred in this period of time when we had the Nazis and occupying different parts of Europe and so on. So, some of the more famous ones we're going to mention, like Dachau and Auschwitz. But again, the whole thing I think the whole thing is so upsetting. It to me, this, no matter how many years I teach this or how many years I study it, just this whole thing that went on in Germany is just, it's beyond imagination, I believe. Anyway, continuing, you have over 1,000 synagogues that were burned that night, 7,500 of the Jewish businesses were either damaged or destroyed. And then we see that an extra 2,000 Jews are going to die in concentration camps from what happened to them, injuries and stuff that were directly related to the, I'm sorry, I'm tired again, to the Kristallnacht. So you see the damage that happened here just because of racism in just that one night. Famous picture of the Germans. It says, walking by a broken window of a Jewish shop destroyed during the Kristallnacht. And again, this is a well-known picture. You can see the windows broken out. You can see is that a reflection past that one guy's head of a Nazi flag down there? And anyway, this is just one of the many, many pictures that are out there. So what do we do in the aftermath? Well, okay, most historians are going to say that the Kristallnacht was a huge turning point, right? And a lot of us believe that it marked the beginning of the Holocaust. The Holocaust is going to be really the final solution where they're going to really determine that they are going to destroy the Jews. That was the idea. Remember, Hitler had written about way back when he was writing Mein Kampf. But anyway, again, as I said, Jewish community was forced to pay money for the cleanup, and they were told to clean it up themselves and all the other things. And then again, at the concentration camps, where 30,000 were taken, another 2,000 people who were not killed in the actual events that night, 2,000 more are going to die in events related, or injuries rather, related to the Kristallnacht. More pictures. Remember, since the Nuremberg laws in 1935, the German Jews have lost their citizenship. Top left, we have, the Star of David, the Judah written in there, which means Jew. And you see in the bottom right, you see the little kids there being forced to wear the yellow star, showing that they're Jews. And again, this is going to cause people in Germany, a lot of the people are going to be subject to such propaganda and again, such brainwashing, especially if you catch them young, like the Hitler Youth, that they believe Jews are not, and some of the others are not really people like they are. There's a fantastic graphic novel. It's actually two parts called Maus, M-A-U-S, okay, German, M-A-U-S. It's in English, but it's written by a guy, won all kinds of awards for it, but it was written by a guy whose father survived the Holocaust as a Jew. So that's definitely worth checking out. But anyway, just some more pictures. Nazis also loved to take pictures and document everything. So when I hear people who are Holocaust deniers, I just shake my head and don't understand because so much of it is well documented. This slide is really interesting. We have over on the left, we have a stereotypical guy who's supposed to look like a Jewish man, has some stereotypical characteristics, nose, forehead, ears, whatever. Um, anyway, there's supposedly a nice Aryan girl that he's kind of gotten drunk or whatever, and he's taking her back into his private room. And the implication is, he's going to have his way with her. So, hey, don't trust the Jews. Look what they're going to do. Now, on the right, yeah, you have the monkey there wearing the Star of David. That tells you something. But I can't pronounce it. But I know I know what it means. The Entartete music. That's actually translated as degenerate music. This was a big thing that happened with the Nazis, okay, because they're going to actually regulate a lot of the music and the art and literature, all sorts of things. Because in the 1920s, that's when you had so much fantastic literature, art, all that coming out at the time. That was the era of where you had, not in Germany, but in general, you had Virginia Woolf, you had all this modernist stuff, Hemingway. So Weimar Germany was one thing, but Nazi Germany is a completely different thing because they're not going to accept a lot of the art, and they're going to try to they're going to try to put the idea out there that the art created by these people who were not Aryans was degenerate. Okay, and the Nazis said that a lot of this modern art and modern music and so on was not moral. Okay, they're pushing immoral things. Now, I remember studying in graduate school. I remember studying. Of course, I had a class in modernism, modernist art, just modernism in general, and there were movements like, for example, we studied a lot about surrealism and post-impressionism. Those were the two that I really liked. But they were banned from Germany because they were considered to be pushing morals that the Germans didn't like. And again, this was a said to be an anti-Semitic and racial thing. Okay. Also, they're going to ban all sorts of things like jazz and swing music. So everything that any Jewish artist of any type did was going to be called degenerate. And officially they were going to ban it in Nazi Germany. So the thing that happens, though, that's interesting is they're going to actually put on some shows, some exhibitions of this kind of art, which is where you see the picture of the monkey over there. That was from, I think it was from a 1938 exhibit, I believe. And we're going to have different sorts of things, like you're going to have Jewish artists being represented there, and anything that they would deem to be insulting to the Germans. And so they would bring these things together to try to make fun to poke fun at the non-Aryan people, the Jews, especially the Jews, the modernist of all sorts. So they were trying basically to get the Germans to really dislike these types of art and music and all of that. Now you're going to see that actually music's going to be really important in Nazi propaganda. And since they've banned certain things, they're also, I mean, like jazz and swing, that was really big. But there are a lot of Jewish musicians, lots of Jewish musicians, and the Jewish artists and the Jewish musicians can't come into Germany and perform. I mean, that's not going to be safe for them, for one thing. They are going to be able to perform in a couple of places, but eventually it's not going to be safe at all, and they know that. So anyway, you're going to have some discrimination is a kind word. As I said, they're banning things and trying to propagandize things so that the German people are going to continue to look down on the Jews and say, and others, again, other minorities, and say that they're not promoting things that would further the Nazi ideology. Okay. So yeah, that's a thing that's going on. I always find myself in the middle of lectures, even sitting here doing a lecture to nobody, which is not nearly as fun, by the way, but it's still, I feel like so disgusted when I talk about this every single time. Here's another gem, and by gem, I mean really terrible thing here, okay? So we've got some more propaganda, and it says up at the top, this is 1936, insatiable. He's got the Star of David on his head. Look at that. He's eating people up. Now it says, it is far from the Jews' thoughts to subjugate one nation. He likes to eat the whole world. So they're making it seem again that the worldwide Jews are planning this huge takeover of the world, when in truth it was the Nazis. Now look over at the right and you see now look at that. It looks like a little Boy Scout poster, right? When I was a little kid, my dad had, for some reason, I do not know why. Honestly, I never really thought of it. Now, I don't know where he got this. He was a middle school principal. I don't think he ever worked at the Boy Scouts. I don't know. But anyway, he had this Boy Scout handbook that I really liked when I was a kid, because there was so much in it that you could do. And a lot of it had to do with outdoors things and things that I could learn. And so I used that Boy Scout handbook, and I didn't know there was a Girl Scouts, and I didn't care. I liked the Boy Scout handbook. But anyway, I remember though, the pictures in there looked very much like that one on the right. Okay, very much same illustration, same style. And you look down there, the Deutsche Arbeiterjugend. Okay, this is the Hitler Youth, the Hitler working youth, the working Hitler Youth, whatever. Okay, so, or the German, working young. So this is basically, though, the Hitler Youth, right? So again, propaganda continues. I want you to imagine opening, say, a magazine and seeing an advertisement today, something like this, with some marginalized group, with some minority or something, okay? So imagine you open a magazine and it says, hey, come to, I'm just going to make up something, I don't know, hey, come to Montana. It's free of gay people or whatever, fill in anything. Now, if you look at this ad, this is an advertisement that is saying, hey, Aryan people, come up here to the Baltic. You know why? You know why it's a good place for you to come on vacation? Come up here because it's Judenfrei. It's free of Jews. Okay, so this is the world they're living in. Now, I've decided to break up this 106 slides. This PowerPoint is going to be broken up into 2 or 3 parts. So I'm going to end part 1 right here. And then the next one will be part 2. You take it up from there. Okay.